Welcome to DSM's Black Art Matters series. We're here today with Leah Harris, who's a Dallas native and a producer, director, and community advocate. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
So we're going to jump right in.
Great.
If you don't mind.
Yeah,
So
let's do
the
it.
series is called Black Art Matters. So we always ask our guests, first off, what does Black identity mean to and for you?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I think, for me, I think Black identity is something that is continuing to evolve, right? But I think ultimately for me, like as I continue to grow in a world that is increasingly polarized and increasingly anti-Black and increasingly anti-woman and all the things that I am, I think that for me, identity just truly means being authentically myself and finding spaces and cultivating spaces and creating spaces where I can be all the things that I want to be, where I can be Black, I can be a woman, I can be proud of all of those things, I can just be authentically who I am. Because I think that, you know, every day I wake up and there is so much on the news and media that's telling me not to be who I am and not to stand for what I stand for, not to care about the people in the communities that I want to care about. And so ultimately, as I am still evolving in my identity and understanding all the things that it means to carry this body and have this skin experience, it's about living authentically and being authentically myself.
And that realization of identity being your authentic self, is that a new kind of realization for you? Have you always known that, or is it because the world we live in that has now shaped that?
I think it's been evolving, right? Like I think, you know, I grew up in a pretty homogenous community right outside of Dallas, and so I didn't really grow up with teachers that looked like me, professors that looked like me. I didn't really have a lot of representation outside of my home. And so I think this idea of like being one's authentic self has really evolved as I've gotten, as I've kind of grown within my professional life, and as I've understood what it meant to be building relationships, working in communities, things like that. I feel like I have learned so much about myself and my identity as a practitioner and a Black woman doing this work through the people that I've surrounded myself with in this work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so how has learning all of this about yourself and even kind of how you grew up and the world you grew up in affected or influenced your work as an artist and as an arts administrator?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, I'm still really trying to, because I don't identify as an actress, right? Like I don't have my BFA, I have my BA. I was very clear from the very beginning, like I was like, I don't want to be on stage. I don't like, I was like, but I still see myself in this world. And so I'm also now trying to like figure out like, okay, so like what is my artistry, right? It's like, I have my degree in theater. I love the theater. I understand the theater. It's the place where I feel the most comfortable. But I think as I've continued to evolve, I'm like, you know, my art form and how I contribute to this world is really the people that I'm around and the people that I'm building connections with. And I mean, like I said, like that has been kind of my biggest teacher, my biggest, you know, my biggest teacher has been the people and the communities that I've been able to cultivate around me. And they have informed so much about how I approach this work, how I advocate for this work, how I align myself within this work. And it's still, you know, again, it's a process, it's a journey. I think what I so love about being an artist is that I get to define how I want to show up and how I want to be all the time, right? It's like my career and my path to where I am right now has not necessarily been super linear, and I think that's true for a lot of artists and arts administrators. And especially when I'm, you know, really, you know, when thinking about being an arts administrator and what does that mean, being a Black woman, being a younger Black woman, and how I want to, what legacy I want to have around me and what legacy I want to build around me. It really makes me think about like how I want to be really, really intentional with the spaces that I create where other people who look like me can be authentic within that. Because I mean, you know, representation matters. I always say like representation matters for the little 6-year-old girl who hasn't seen herself, but it also matters for the 28-year-old woman who has not seen herself, right? Like it still matters that I see myself in spaces of positions of power and privilege and all these things. And so I think ultimately like I want my work and I want whatever legacy I'm building and leaving behind to be a space where people who look like me can just be themselves, because I think Black women are so like policed and in a way that is so oppressive, right? And so it's just, you know, I work really hard to cultivate spaces around me where people who look like me can just live authentically and be authentically within community, within the context of art form. So whether it's I'm in a rehearsal room, whether I'm in a community space, whether I'm in a boardroom, like I really try and make those spaces feel like how I want to be embraced when I'm in those spaces.
You just mentioned so much that I want to unpack there.
I know.
But I want to start with this idea of, the cultivation of community around you that's led to where you are now.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've been very intentional with that community that you've built around you.
Right.
Have you always been intentional in the building of that community, or are you just now coming into that intentionality?
I think I'm really coming into that intentionality. I think, when I graduated, I was like, well, what am I going to do? Right. Like I have this degree. What am I going to do? And I think, I have been fortunate to have, been able to build a career that I really loved and that I've really enjoyed. And I think with that, it's allowed me the freedom to, as the years have gone by, to be really intentional about the people that I, want to align myself with, and, the kinds of communities that I want to be working with, and the kinds of, I don't want to say issues, but the kinds of questions and ideas and problems that I want to be, talking about and asking questions about, and figuring out how we can use art and storytelling and healing to answer and address those questions. So I would say I'm as I get older, I think I'm being way more intentional about it.
And do you find that intentionality is easy for you as a Black individual?
I think, I think it depends on the context of the space, right? Because I also can acknowledge that since I have, graduated with my undergrad, I've been predominantly in white institutions, right? So I've worked, full-time in white institutions, and those spaces aren't meant for me. Those spaces aren't meant to allow me to be my authentic self, which is why I work so hard to try and, rewrite that. So I definitely just want to name that, I have kind of been within the system trying to navigate cultivating these spaces. So I think depending on the context, really, it's not always easy when you're working within a, hierarchical, heteropatriarchy, system because it's I am the antithesis of a lot of that. Yeah. So.
And you also are probably the first guest that we've had that's brought up full point this idea of their legacy and being intentional about what legacy they want to leave behind them.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that a bit for us?
Yeah, honestly, that it's been a conversation that I'm a part of a fellowship through American for the Arts that I just got into, and we've just kicked off our kind of year-long of professional development and growth, and that was one thing that has come up. And I've always said, and a dear friend and mentor has always said to me, be really intentional about lifting as you climb, right? So as you go through this work, as you go through this journey, make sure that you are lifting behind you as you climb, and as you ascend to the next level or role or whatever it is, make sure there's a path behind you for someone else to come. And and so I have always kind of held that really close to me, and I've been really intentional about that. But then when I got into this fellowship with other arts and culture arts administrators of color, we started talking about legacy, and it's an interesting conversation because we can talk about familial legacy and how a lot of specifically Black families might not have that legacy within their familial history, or they just don't know because of X, Y, and Z situations. But also legacy within our work, right? And thinking about not so much what you leave behind, but what you're doing right now. What legacy am I building right now, right? While I'm still on this earth, living, breathing, able-bodied, all those things. What am I doing right now that is building my legacy? And so it's a new thing that I've been thinking of, and it's a new, especially when I'm in this time of figuring out what the next thing is going to be for me, what the next kind of full-time thing is going to be for me. I'm really trying to think about what is in this crazy time of COVID, right? In this crazy time of just who knows what tomorrow is going to bring, and who knows, when we'll be back to whatever normal was. Right. I'm really trying to lean into this idea of how can I maximize this time to really think about what it is that I want to be doing for the next 5 to 10 years. Yep. And this conversation of legacy is just something that me and my peers have just been starting to talk about a little bit.
And it's interesting. So you being a 28-year-old, Black woman in this industry and talking about your legacy, while also facing the problems that we have now.
Yeah.
I'm interested, did you have mentors or support system as you came up through this industry that also thought that same way? Or are you finding that you were kind of the first step of breed in what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been fortunate. I mean, I definitely have had people within this industry that have always been in my corner and that have like, you know, no matter what, have supported me. And I think the camaraderie, the camaraderie, it's a double-edged sword. It's like, you know, we are able to bond and share these experiences through kind of our trauma, right? Through the realization that we are Black people living and working within a system that was never meant to center our humanity in the first place. But because we are Black people, we are so, you know, joyful and honest and truthful in that this art form is for us and it is for all of us, and we have a place within this art form. So I'm fortunate that I have people, you know, in the field, you know, both here in Dallas and nationally, that are in my corner and that look like me and that have looked at me and said, I get it, I hear you, I see you, you're not crazy, you know, like these are all like real things that are happening. So I count myself to be really, really lucky within that. And I think, I mean, as I'm starting to think about legacy, I kind of am like, yeah, like I think this is something that more of us should talk about, right? And especially when we're in this kind of moment of, you know, pause in all the traditional ways of, you know, how we're producing live theater, when we're trying to get innovative, and, you know, so many theaters aren't operating right now, and like we're in this huge moment of pause on top of a pandemic, on top of, you know, acute racial injustice and anti-Blackness in this world. I think like I'm interested to see how we as Black people and other people of color are taking time to kind of slow down and think about how we want to re-enter this next phase, right? And I think that's also kind of part of what I was talking about, of just like taking the time to really think about, you know, what it is that I want to be doing, and, you know, how I want to be, how I want to be, right? Like just how I want to be right now. And so, but really thinking about like, what is it, how is it that I'm going to come out of this on the other side? And what is it that I've learned? What is it that I'm going to be bringing? You know, what is it that I'm going to be giving? Just trying to be really intentional about how we emerge from this. I think is also just kind of like a conversation that I'm interested in, because I kind of feel like right now, you know, Black people are in a moment of, we're needing to heal. And so I've also been like really just like thinking about like, okay, like what is it that I need to heal right now? Because I know that I have had a lot of trauma working in the arts field, right? And like working in predominantly white institutions. And I've, you know, kind of normalized a lot of behavior that we are now seeing on a national level, you know, is not okay, and it's not right, and it is truly meant to oppress me. So really just thinking about like, you know, how we heal, how we can be our whole selves and emerge from this and be and be the, you know, because we are the ones that we've been waiting for, to sound as cliche as it sounds, you know, but to be the leaders that we have always said we wanted to be.
So staying on this topic of trauma and healing for a second, we've spoken to several guests about how, you know, trauma has informed their present and future decisions, and trauma being their personal trauma that they've experienced, but also their ancestral trauma that we still feel and hold on to, right? How do you navigate that trauma in your personal and professional life in a way that doesn't create additional trauma for you to then not be able to do your work most effectively?
And well, and I think that's the thing. It's like that's the issue. It's like as we unpack, it's like, you know, as we continue to unpack all of the trauma, we then go into these institutions and have to hear about George Floyd, or have to hear about, to make it local, Jordan Edwards here in Dallas, you know, to hear about Breonna Taylor. And so it's like, it's hard because it's like you want to be able to, And also too, it's like I'm like, I don't even know if I have all of the tools and understanding to know what it is that I need to heal, right? Because again, like I'm living in a world, and every single day I'm being told, that I'm like, not enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I shouldn't stand for this and I shouldn't do that, and all these things. And so it's like I'm like, I don't even know if I really fully have like the tools and the understanding to know what it is to heal. But I also like, for me, I always say like the personal is political, and like I bring my full self to this work. And my work calls me to bring my full self. And I think, everyone that's in this field, it's hard to kind of turn off after 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock whenever we get home, right? It's like this work it's personal and it's political. And so it's like, as I, continue to learn and evolve and grow and understand what, traumas are coming up from my past with my family or just within my personal life, I'm also having to deal with like the trauma of being a Black woman right now in 2020, right? And so it's like, it's coming at me from both sides, and then I'm in an institution, right? Or I was in an institution, right? And you feel the pressure of being in an institution that, doesn't make a statement quick enough, or that doesn't have, proper, we don't understand how to, speak out for Black Lives Matter, and it's it takes weeks for us to come up with how we respond to this, and it's just like, how is this? It's like this is my life, like this is my humanity, this is my and it's just it's a battle. It's such a battle, because it's like, why am I working so hard to be a full person in a space that again was not meant to center my humanity, but also like this art, like this art is for me, right? As much as it is for you, as much as it is for anyone else, right? And so it's like, it's this constant battle of loving the very thing that kind of tears you apart, but also building up a resiliency to like keep going, right? And so it's hard. I mean, it's really hard, and I think that like, people, I'm hoping that, again, like as we are kind of in this moment of pause, I hope that we can really think about how we take care of ourselves that's not separate from the 9 to 5, right? So like, how do we build in like radical self-care and radical love and radical joy into our 9 to 5? Like, how is that part of our practice? How is that built into our budgets? How is that built into our institutions? And it's part of just like the dismantling that needs to happen, because right now, the work that I think that Black people, Black women, Black trans people need to heal and be whole in this work does not fit within a white supremacist culture, within institutions, and within this art form, And so it's like, that's why I'm like, I hope that this time really gives us the courage to like dismantle it all and like reimagine it in a way that allows us to sustain it for the next, 100 years.
So just speaking to you and everything you just said, you are clearly incredibly enlightened and up to date on kind of what it's like and what it feels like to work in a predominantly white institution. When you were starting your career and coming up through those predominantly white institutions, were you aware of that white supremacy at all?
No, because it is quiet and silent, and you're indoctrinated in ways that you don't even realize. And it's not until you're invited to like an EDI session, right? Or it's not until you're like, it's not until something like happens where you're like, wait, this isn't who we are per our mission statement, or this isn't who we are per the fact that we're in Dallas, Texas, or this isn't who we are, per being nonprofit, right, who serves a community who does not look like any of the people sitting in this room, so so absolutely not. And I think that like coming up, I was obviously aware of, systems of oppression, and I was aware of, I was aware, I think I was aware that that systems of oppression existed, and I was aware that there were obvious gaps in representation, and obvious gaps in, it's white on the top, brown on the bottom kind of thing, like just to put it plainly. But I didn't have like the language or the knowledge or the understanding, or honestly like the true like deep like feeling and being a victim of some of like the blatant, behavior and just white supremacy culture until, much later.
And now that you have all that knowledge and further awareness, just on a personal level, what is your tolerance for it in your work?
Very little. Very, very, very,
And
very
can you
little.
talk to us about how you navigate working through that little tolerance in a industry that is still so heavy
Yeah.
and ingrained in white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, most recently, like, I'm super thankful for the teams that I've had, like, just as far as, like, the people that I've had to manage and the people that I've been around me have been other people of color who have been just a kind of safety net for me. And, you know, working in, you know, education, community engagement, community programming, you know, you're very lucky if you're able to like really find the people that are super aligned with, you know, your values and your goals, and they're people first, and they're all in it. And so, I mean, I think like it's hard because especially when coming out of my most recent job being a Black woman who was in a position of leadership within a new institution, I had to navigate so many things, and I had to, while just understanding and learning about everything that was in front of me, right, and building a new team and trying to build new programming and doing all the things, and so I mean, I don't even know if I could give you an example of like how I navigate that like little tolerance, but I do know that like for me it's like I like small is all, like
Right.
small actions, small ways that like I was really intentional about like taking care of myself and my team of BIPOC artists, was really kind of a way that like we resisted, was like we would be really intentional about our self-care. We'd be really intentional about, you know, speaking our values on our sleeves, you know, like just trying to be very transparent about we are Black and brown people doing this work, and that requires a certain level of care that we have to have for ourselves before we can pour into this institution and the community, right? And so I was very vocal about like when I need to take a day, when my team would need to be off site, when, you know, and so I feel like things like that, just like the small things were helpful in us trying to like, not like create distance, but like really just trying to, advocate for ourselves and our own kind of self-care, because I think there's also this, you know, this narrative that people who are in this kind of line of work are just like resilient humans who can work, you know, thousands of hours a week and not, you know, and who we could just keep giving and giving and giving.
Right.
And I learned very quickly when I was in a director level position that I had people looking up to me, and I like report, you know, I was like, oh, no, like this is, we have to take care of ourselves first, and we have to
Right.
make that very clear. And we have to make it very clear why we have to do that. I was like, because I am a person, I am a whole person first. And if you want me to do this job in a way that is authentic and has trust and has joy and has radical, you know, inclusivity in it, like I need to make sure that I'm good first, and I need to make sure the people around me are good first. So we're gonna have to set some boundaries here.
Yes, 100%. So going off of all of that, like
Yeah,
you just
I know.
said, everything we've already talked about, you've also been extremely vocal in the We See You White American Theater movement. Can you talk about your thoughts and perspective and what you've done in that realm to further that work nationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, again, like this kind of moment of pause, and this moment of us, you know, of theaters not producing right now. I really, it's these kind of public call outs I think are really important. And I think what I'm most interested to see, and what I'm most excited for, is this idea that public call outs or public shaming, or, you know, call it whatever that is, the narrative around that changing a little bit to where we've gotten to the point now where these movements, whether it's, you know, the We See You or whatever these other, you know, other local organizing movements, you know, you're seeing a lot of like university and colleges like come out with, you know, BIPOC artists and students coming out saying like, this institution is not here to support our growth and our development as young artists. All those things, you know, it's important, and it's necessary. And I think for so long, you know, we've been told, even like with like the Me Too movement, right, a couple of years ago, and how that impacted us here in Dallas, and you know, regionally and nationally, all these things. I think we've been told that these movements have to happen kind of underground and in silence, and that people have to organize behind behind closed doors, and I've definitely had experience with that, and I've learned so much through that. And so I'm most excited, hopefully, to see the narrative change around what this idea of, a public call out looks like, right? And I think that, what you're seeing is that you're seeing artists and people, whether they're affiliated with an organization or not, saying enough is enough, and that there's strength in numbers, and that community, we are better together, right? And like we know more together. And, I think that, and it's also just like, art should be for the public good, right? And for public consumption, and theater should be, absorbed by as many people as it can be. And so I think for me, it's only right that the very systems that make art be, for the public, get called out publicly. It just makes sense to me.
So I'm curious then, Leah, do you think personally, I think we can both attest that it's easy when we're not in a time where theaters are actually having to produce work, right? It's easy to make the statement when you don't have anything that you have to do to actually back up the statement on your stages and in your core work and your core mission. Do you think when we get back to a place of producing and presenting specifically in theater, that we will see these changes that are being promised and guaranteed actually be carried through the work?
Not immediately. No, not immediately, because I also recognize that we are doing this movement work, and and all of this is happening, within the context of a pandemic, right? And so it's also like it's important to kind of just remember that we are in the midst of a pandemic, and I think that so yeah, no, I don't think so. I think it's going to take time, and I think that whatever kind of organizing is happening, whatever kind of call outs are happening, I think we have to realize that it took X amount of years to build these institutions, for regional theaters, 50, 60, 70 years, even with Broadway, everything else. It's like it took so much time to build these up. It's going to take so much more time to really, really, kind of meet these demands in full. I think that I do think that we'll start to see, and I think that, I think we can already kind of start to see the ways that some theaters are starting to shift and starting to, make some changes. I think there's some kind of low hanging fruit, but I'm also like, okay, so what is performative, right? And like what is in response to this current moment, and what is long withstanding, right? And like what is, it's almost like, the spaces that are, that have been quiet for a while, it's like, okay, like, it's like, that's what I'm interested to seeing, like what's going to be coming out soon, because it's like, I'm going to hope that you're really like doing like the deep introspective work to like really, really dismantle all of this. And then I want to see what you're, going to do. But yeah, I think it's going to take time. And I think, I look forward to the day that we are a stronger, better, more equitable, anti-racist, theater field. And I so look forward to that. But I think it's going to take time, and I think that that's okay. And I think that, I think that that's okay, but I also think it's important to stay super steadfast in our mission, because I personally don't think that our theaters and our field can afford to go back at this point, right? So I think that if it's going to be a slow runway to progress, then that's great. But I don't know, and I honestly don't know how much longer, like I can withstand and sustain if we go back, right? Or if we just ignore, if we just act like this is just temporary, if we act like this is just a moment in response to what happens this summer, because it's like, no, and it's like, these are all things, I think ultimately, what happened this summer, I guess, with, if we just want to say with George Floyd, right, and these civil unrest, and this moment of like just true like anti-Blackness within our nation, has really just highlighted the major inequities that happen within our institutions, right? And I think ultimately, like, my pull and my like desire to use my platform and try and organize and align myself has been like, yeah, no, I've been saying that this has been a problem for a couple of years now, right? Like, the very systems that allowed George Floyd to be lynched in the streets are the same. Like, this is all systemic, right? And like, and we see it in big ways, and we see it in small ways. And so for me, it was like, oh yeah, like this is the moment. And it's, and there are days like where it's like, it's exhausting and it's tiring, and it's like, are we ever going to see any sort of progress? Like, but then there are days where it's really uplifting, right? Because you realize, like, you look to your left and you look to your right, and you're all like focused on moving forward, and that's really inspiring.
So you have worked in many education and community engagement departments, both here in Dallas and also at other organizations across the country. Working in predominantly white organizations in a community engagement department, sometimes there can be a misalignment between engagement versus, forward-thinking impact for community. Can you talk about your work there and your thoughts of that engagement versus actual true impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's all about relationships and it's all about people. And that's what theater was founded on, was a set of relationships. And across the board in all these institutions, everything is a relationship with artists, donors, board members, committees, staff, it's all in the rehearsal room. Like, it's all about relationships. I think I feel really fortunate. I feel like when I was kind of like coming into this a handful of years ago, it was still very much like, how do we define this work, and how do we what are we calling it? Okay, it's not outreach anymore, it's engagement and it's relationships and it's all these things. And I felt like, when I came into it, particularly here in Dallas, I had Dallas as kind of my template to explore and really think about what this means and what it means for Dallas Theater Center, which is where I was working at the time. And I think, I still struggle with I talk about the work, right? And how I define it and how I measure the impact, because to me, it's all about the people and it's all about the relationships, and it's hard, and I still find it hard to kind of put that in a box necessarily. But I mean, ultimately, I think, within institutions, within nonprofit institutions, if we have a mission, if we're a 501c3, everything we should be doing is for the public good, right? And everything we should be doing is for the community that we serve, right? And so I think it's a great thing that, that shift was happening and that people were really thinking about that kind of programming. I think what I find most, I think what I find most important is, we always talk about how this work should be one conversation, right? There should be one conversation about how you talk about community impact, community engagement, whatever it is, the same way that you would talk to, your board president, the highest seat, within your organization, is the same way that you would talk to a community member about it, right? And there is no, it is one conversation. And so I think that there's still work to be done there, and kind of dismantling, even within that's hierarchy, but dismantling kind of the hierarchy and making the spaces internally just feel more democratic, which maybe that's loaded, but it's a lot of it really is kind of dismantling this hierarchy and remembering that this art form was founded on a set of relationships, right? And we do relationships in our life outside of being arts administrators, right? But the minute we get into, these institutions and these systems, we want to put, all these restrictions around it, and we need X amount of these people to show up, and we need this for this grant funding, and we need this for audience development and and it's just this is not, that it becomes so systemic, right? And it feels like we're trying to put people into a machine for a certain level of outcome. And so I think the more that we can kind of dismantle that and really look at how we make this more democratic and more fair, and more reflective, because again, I think representation matters, and I think, and I know it's so cliche, and maybe it's just because it's been said so much, but it's if I don't see myself, why would I want to go in, right? If I don't see, so it's just that's such a small little thing, but it's if we are not reflective of the people that we say we serve, why would we ever think that we could build relationships with them? It's just, and so I don't even know if that answered the question.
It did,
but,
and
okay.
so much more. Leah, you have provided so much great insight for us today. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to wrap us up here on one final question, and that is, you are such a wonderful and powerful voice, especially for, those of us who are in our 20s and who have been in director positions and are trying to push this work forward in organizations that weren't built for us.
Right.
If you could give any one piece of advice for those similar to you who are working in this field or just now coming up into where you have been and will continue to be, what would that advice be?
Oh gosh. Is this in the context of advice for someone that looks like me?
Yes.
Okay. I think ultimately, like, you will make mistakes and they will be your biggest teachers. And you will have another chance to do it again. I think it's okay to fail. I think we should talk about our failures. I think we should be honest about the ways that we mess up in this work and the ways that we need people to kind of insulate us, to help us learn and grow and be better. But yeah, I think sometimes we talk about like leadership and like being in these positions as if like we have to be perfect people who don't make mistakes or who don't mess up or who don't, and it's like, no, it's like part of doing this work is like being a person that says, yeah, this isn't, I messed up. I didn't do it right.
Yeah.
I was on the phone the other day with someone and they asked me like, what was a time where you, is there a time in your leadership where you made a mistake? And I was like, yeah, like all the time, and so just kind of like demystifying this idea that like, when you get to a certain level within this field that that you have all the answers and that you'll be perfect and that like, it's like, no, it's like you will make mistakes and you will have a chance to try again. And those mistakes, they will be your biggest teachers. I mean, and it's so cliche, I know, but like, I mean, I can attest to that. And it has allowed me to give myself grace and patience in a way that I haven't before. Because I think that I was part of that, like, well, once I get in and get to this position, I'll know it all and I'll be fine. It's like, that's not true. I'm still very much learning.
Yeah. That's great advice, Leah. I think for all of us watching this episode, I want to thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your time and talents with us. And I think I speak for all of Dallas when we say we're so lucky to have someone like you who is working on our behalf and within our city on everything that you're working on. So thank you for being with us today and for sharing your time and talents.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course.